thank you all for coming. This is Nacio Jan Brown, whose wonderful work is out for a period of 10 years, beginning in the mid-1960s, Nacio photographed virtually all of the major anti-war and social protest movements and activities in the Bay Area. His photographs were published widely in the underground press of the Times. In '68, he was a staff photographer at the San Francisco Express-Times, and in '69, a staff photographer for the San Francisco Good Times. Since the 1960s, his photographs have been published in many books, magazines, and newspapers worldwide, including the art historian Peter Sell's recent book, The Art of Engagement. His photographs have been exhibited in a number of museums and galleries, including the DeYoung Focus Gallery, the Ansel Adams Friends of Photography Gallery, the Art Museum here at UC Berkeley, and most recently at the Berkeley Art Center as part of the exhibit, The Whole World is Watching.
I was going to Cal at the time, and so I went to, I learned how to develop film and a lot about photography at the ASUC darkroom down here, the ASUC studio, and which was a very fertile place to be around. There were a lot of photographers there, and the photographers that were there, the house style was rocks and trees and roots and time exposures of streams, so the water gets all kind of fuzzy looking, and 2 1/4 format film, which is quite a bit larger than 35 millimeter, and find the finest grain film Kodak made, Panatomic X, and developed in Microdoll, which is a really fine grain developer, and the thought was to make these impeccable, gorgeous, zero grain pictures of rocks and trees, and I just couldn't do it. There was all this stuff going up in Sproul Plaza, and all this student stuff, and that was what interested me. So I went up there, started taking pictures, and the one goal that I had was that I wanted my negatives to be just as sharp and just as the prints to be just as impeccable with a 35 millimeter negative as you could get with a 2 1/4 square negative. And so I was always really quality oriented. There was this newspaper, San Francisco Express-Times, that the photographer that was their staff photographer, a really terrific photographer named Jeffrey Blankford, he was going to go to Mexico, I think. Anyway, he was leaving for somewhere, and he was looking for somebody to step into his shoes. And I guess I showed him my work, and I'm sure some other people showed him their work. He picked me. And I have to say that a lot of what I've been able to do was just that luck, just the luck of having been the person that was picked, and also having it been 1968, because the heyday of the underground press, 3 years tops. I mean, there was a couple of them before '68. By '71, it wasn't happening. I mean, some of them didn't go out of business for a while, but it was really exactly the right time. And the other thing about that is that one of the things that I found was that I was now the staff photographer, which meant that every week I could bring in my pictures and I would have an outlet for them. And so again, this is just this astonishing luck. And one of the things that, at least for me, and I'm sure for many people, if there's an outlet, if there's a consistently, dependably appreciative audience for your work, you get much better real fast. This is Veterans Day in 1968, and the shot in the middle of the soldiers marching away and that one guy looking back, I've often wondered, in 1968, did this guy go to Vietnam? Good chance. Did he come back? Who knows? There was a strike at San Francisco State, the Third World Strike, that started in '68 and went on until '69. And Hayakawa, he was the president of San Francisco State, and we used to like to run these satirical headlines. The one that got us in trouble was some months before Bobby Kennedy got shot, we ran a headline that said, "Kennedy shot again." And when Bobby Kennedy got shot, we were visited by the FBI. It was entirely just a fluke. Anyway, you can see these are all pictures. You know, the cover. This is when this is before George Wallace recanted his racist attitudes, which he did. He recanted, but this was before that. This is taken at a convention at the Cow Palace. For not a convention, you call it a rally or something at the Cow Palace for George Wallace. Interesting that he recanted. I just brought this because there's two photographs that I've lost the negatives for, and this one of Frank Zappa. It just kills me that I don't have this negative. So I brought this to just so people could see my Frank Zappa shot, which I really liked a lot. You know, this is on the back of one of those papers. One of the things that I did with the Express Times, I think unlike other photographers, at least some other photographers, the people that ran these papers, they weren't journalists. They were just students. They were just activists. Hey, kids, let's start a paper. I would never show a contact sheet to an editor and tell the editor, okay, which one do you want? I decided which one to print. And those were the only pictures that they ever saw. And that, I think, also helped keep the quality up. In 1969, Rolling Stone did a special issue that had an insert. The American Revolution, 1969, they ran a bunch of my stuff. Here's the insert. And there's many more inside. That's my one Rolling Stone cover. There's an interesting story that goes with this. This is the front page of what was known as the LNS packet, Liberation News Service packet. And it was probably 69, maybe 70. I decided I wanted to buy a print washer. And the leading edge, the best print washer you could get was made in, I think, Grinnell, Iowa, by a company called East Street Gallery. And the guy that was the owner of this company and started it and designed this thing, I guess, was a guy named Henry Wilhelm, who has since become one of the foremost experts on archival preservation of photographs. So I call up and I say, I want to order this and I want to have it be such and such a size with so many slots for prints and everything. Great. Okay, we can do this. What's your name? And I said, it's Nacio Brown. And the guy says, Nacio Brown, you're a photographer? And I said, yeah. And he said, oh, we love your work. We print your work. And I said, what do you mean you print my work? And he said, we print your work all the time. We get on the Liberation News Service packet. And I said, what is the LNS packet? I had no idea that every week since I started, after they did what they were doing with my pictures, and also the articles written by various people, they would send it off to New York, to Liberation News Service, who would then produce the packet in a legal-sized stack of papers, and they would send it out, I think, twice a week.
No, once a week.
Once a week, and I think it was $15 a month. It was really cheap, and this was as close as the underground press could come to having a wire service. This was all in paper, you know, and so this was I didn't mind. It was just sort of a shock when this guy in Iowa tells me how much he likes my pictures. It was great. So that's how I learned about Liberation News Service. I mentioned that the underground, the heyday of the underground press was really over by 1971. The Berkeley Barb, I photographed for the Berkeley Barb kind of casually for 2 or 3 years, and in 1975 I stopped. That was when my book was published, and it was also, which was significant for people of my generation, the year that the helicopter took off the roof of the embassy in Saigon. And it really was all over at that point. And I stopped photographing at that point. And this is another negative that I hate that I lost. I'm sorry for the, you can see it's on a newspaper that was delivered folded. And again, journalism people should like this. Herb Cain. And I really wish I'd have that negative. I really wish I'd had that negative available when he died. It would have been a wonderful, poignant picture. Now, in 1979, there's a sort of a follow-up story. The people that ran, or one of the guys that ran Liberation News Service, edited a book of pictures from the underground press, and called Shots. This was during the Iranian hostage crisis of 1979. And it's very hard to see, but the picture on the left is a picture of, in Iran, of Iranian protesters holding up a poster. They'd made thousands of these things. And it's the shot on the right, which was the same shot that was on the cover of Rolling Stone. And the Iranians were representing to their people that this was current, and that the kid on the ground was an Iranian, and that this was what was happening in the United States, that the United States police were wholesale beating Iranians to the ground. Some reporter came and took the picture, and then some reporter wanted to interview me about the incident. And what happened was something that I've seen happen too many times in journalism, and that was, he didn't want the story. He didn't want to know what my part of the story was. He just wanted me to supply a couple of quotes for the story that was already in his head. And he said, "Isn't this terrible that the Iranians are doing this? I mean, look what they're doing. They're lying. They're misrepresenting something." And I said, "That's what governments do. That's what the CIA does. That's just what governments do." I wasn't the interview that he wanted. You know, I wasn't going to go along with, "My God, I'm outraged, and how can they do such?" You know, this is everyday stuff for governments. Another guy who was in the book had a picture that was also usurped by the Iranians. Steve Shames, terrific photographer, did a lot of great work here. He sued him. I only found this out about a year ago. He sued him, and he got $4,000 from the Iranians. He won his lawsuit and I said, "Steve, why didn't you tell me I would have joined the suit?" You know. Anyway, so that's enough about the underground press. Now I'm going to start showing photographs. This is Stop the Draft Week, which was an event in 1967. I'm shooting into the morning sun. Big flare, lens flare, can't get rid of it. The only thing to do with it is to position it, you know, in a nice graphic way. This is a sit-in at Stop the Draft Week. The woman in the left rear is Kay Boyle, who was a fairly well-known writer, and I looked her up on Wikipedia within the last year. Wow, what a life she had. This was a free spirit, this lady, way ahead of her time. She didn't care about sex scandals or anything. She was going to do what she wanted to do. This is also Stop the Draft Week, draft card burning over in front of the federal building. This is not free speech movement. I got here just too late for that. I wasn't photographing in 64. This was probably 1966. And this illustrates something that I wanted to talk about, the position of a photographer. Where was I when I took this picture? Well, I was right in front of this guy. And that's the interesting thing about a photographer, is that you're in the center of the action. You know, you're this far away from what everybody's looking at. So you're right there, and at the same time, you're not part of it. You have a different function. And so it's this sort of ambiguous position that photographers have. This is a sit-in shot in Sproul Hall. Who knows what 1967 maybe? And I have this on my webpage. One of the things I point out is that sit-ins were really boring. You would occupy the building, and it was really thrilling, and there'd be a couple of speeches, and then nothing. You know, you had to wait until the police came, but they weren't going to come until like 6 o'clock in the morning. And so you're sitting around, you're not very comfortable, you get hungry, you kind of get grouchy. And I think this pretty well illustrates the ennui. And for people who have seen the movie, what is it, The Discreet Charm of the Bourgeoisie, the Buñuel film, where nobody can leave the room for some unknown reason. This always reminds me of that. A couple of high school students in San Francisco. Some Black Panthers. This is 1967, I think. This is Eldridge Cleaver. I like this shot because I know that I took it at a 15th of a second, which isn't so easy. He fled to Cuba the next day. No one knew he was going to do that. And then went to Algeria, and it was several years before he missed the United States. His later career was interesting. I think he was a Christian something, and then one of his late ventures was cleavers, which was a line of pants that he sold. The interesting thing about the cleavers is that they had cod pieces. This is his wife, Kathleen, taken at the same, within a couple of minutes of the shot of cleaver. Here's a shot. The more things change, the more they stay the same. This is the International Industrialist Conference, probably 1970, with the two industrialists there being guarded by the Praetorian Guard. This is in front of the Fairmont at San Francisco. San Francisco State, this is my other shot that has the lens flare. Also San Francisco State. This is the one that made it to the cover of Rolling Stone. It's probably hard to tell, but this cop was really worried. He was a young guy, probably the same age as the guy on the ground. The guy on the ground looked terrible. Head wounds would gush. You have a little tiny scratch, doesn't mean a thing, but your face is just this mass of blood. And people were screaming at this cop, just screaming at this guy. And he was afraid of, he didn't know how badly hurt the guy was, and he was very nervous. This was 1968, I guess. This is in 1969. This is James Rector, who was a bystander at People's Park, one of the demonstrations, on a roof. And the police, probably, I believe, an Alameda County Sheriff's deputy, shot him had loaded, in spite of the instructions that they load their guns with birdshot. Several of the deputies loaded with buckshot instead, which is like bullets. And they hit this guy, and he died a few days later. The initial reports of buckshot were categorically denied by the police department. And they had to go back on that when the doctors at the emergency hospitals would show them, look, this is what we took out of these people. And then, well, maybe we did have some buckshot here and there. This is also during People's Park. This was an attempt, I don't know what, a crowd control vehicle? Kind of hard to figure. That's pepper fog coming out of the back. It wasn't really an effective weapon because when people saw it coming, they just sort of went into the stores or around the corner and waited for it to go away. That didn't work. So having learned that didn't work, the university and the police decided on a different tactic. And that was this was a really cynical event. I happened to be standing immediately under the corner of the balcony of the Student Union, and an official got up on the balcony with a bullhorn. There's an immense crowd, completely surrounded by police from every, Pinole, everywhere you can think of, Highway Patrol, National Guard, the whole deal, shoulder to shoulder with gas masks on, around this immense crowd in Sproul Plaza. You could come in, but you couldn't leave. And the guy gets up in the corner with a bullhorn and he says, in the name of people of California, I ordered you to disperse. If you do not disperse, chemical reagents will be dropped. And I heard chemical reagents will be dropped. Right then I knew what was going to happen. And there it is. If you were there, it's an indelible memory. You will remember it. And one of the people that is a Facebook friend said that that's her earliest childhood memory, was being tear gassed. She was in her mother's arms at, 2 years old, whatever. And this is her earliest memory. The other thing that I think was cynical about it was that having got this thing all ready to roll, there was no way they weren't going to use it. It's just a done deal. When they get this thing all set up, we're going to do it. I had a gas mask, just one hardware store respirator thing, and of course a helmet. And I think I was the last person out of Lower Sproul Plaza. This is Huey Newton on release from jail. For many years, there was the bumper stickers, Free Huey, Free Huey. They finally did. And then I took some pictures of the Chicago 8, soon to be Chicago 7.
Chicago 8, and they got rid of Bobby.
Well, they didn't get rid of Bobby. Bobby, his trial was severed from the trial of the other ones because Bobby had Charles Gary as his attorney, and the other ones had William Kunstler. And I was actually present at the initial meetings between these guys in Chicago. They flew me back there to take pictures of them. And I'll digress. They wanted to raise money for the defense by never ever posing together except for Richard Avedon. And this was floated at a party at Tom Hayden's house over on Ashby. And I was there and I said, what is this? Richard Avedon. I said, I've been shooting in the streets. It should be a movement photographer that does this. And they agreed. So they flew me to Chicago, and I'm at these meetings, and these two sort of old lions, Kunstler and Gary, are jockeying around each other. And it was the Chicago 8, and so I was trying to get a setup, and there was a picture, well-publicized picture taken during the riots in the convention of all these kids on a hill in Grant Park that has a statue of some general on top of it on a horse. And I thought, I'm going to shoot there. That's it'll recall that other thing. So we're going to do it at noon on Tuesday. So everybody comes except Bobby Seale doesn't come. And the rest of them are all there. Abby and Jerry are messing around on the horse. And I said, we waited and waited. And I said, well, do I shoot? Do I shoot? Well, no, you can't shoot. It's the Chicago 8. We've got to wait for Bobby. And he's the only black guy. We're just not going to leave him out. I said, okay, so I didn't shoot. Well, what happens? Bobby Seale trial gets severed. The Chicago 8 becomes the Chicago 7, all of whom were right there. I didn't take a picture. Bad idea. This is me. Speaking of Pinole cops, this was during People's Park. They grabbed this guy, this big beefy guy grabs me, and I had AP credentials at the time. I was a stringer for AP. And what I was really doing was shooting in color to send stuff to Black Star, but I had one camera with black and white so I could give I was cheating. I was not being fair. I had to give AP something to keep the credential going. Anyway, this cop grabs me. This is in the first block of Telegraph. And there were like 4 or 5 other photographers there who were my friends. And the other guy that was there was Bob Klein, who was the photo bureau chief of AP. And this guy grabs me, and one of the photographers is there. And I said, get Klein, trying to have them go and get Bob Klein so he could tell, like, hey, this guy's working for AP, let him go. Well, they did, finally, after they took all the pictures they wanted to take. With this guy choking me. And then they went and got Klein, and the guy did let me go. It was a couple of days later I got arrested and taken to Santa Rita. I told the cop I had AP credentials in my back pocket. This is me slammed onto the hood of the car, and I was told, I don't give a damn what you have, motherfucker, you're going to jail. So I got bailed out in the middle of the night. This is the beginning of a few pictures of portraits of people in the arts. This is James Broughton. James Broughton, filmmaker, poet, Michelangelo Antonioni, film director. This is in his suite at the Stanford Court Hotel, and on my way over to San Francisco, I was trying to figure out, what am I going to do with this guy? I know what I'll do with him. We'll take him to a park down the street, and I'll have him lie on the grass with half of his body behind a bush, with from the waist up showing, with his head on his elbow, evocative of Blow Up, which was where there's this dead body that, the whole thing, if you saw the movie, it would make sense. And I went in there and I said that I wanted to, there's a park a block away, let's go do this. And his MGM minder, oh, Mr. Antonioni can't do anything like that. So that didn't happen. But it would have been a good shot, but this is a pretty good shot too. This is Georges Franju, who is a French New Wave director. His most notable film, I think, is probably Eyes Without a Face, kind of a horror movie. And he was a little guy, and I thought, what am I going to do with him? And then I just had this idea of a flash and the shadow of his hand on his face. I would like to have been a little bit more, but this works. And so I have this bare bulb flash, and we're outside, so there's no background. And I'm about 4 feet from him, and I take a picture, and this flash goes off. And then I take another picture, and the flash goes off. And this is just, blinding him. And he said, no, no. And he walked away. So I got 2 shots, This is Martin Scorsese as a young guy. And I thought, what am I going to do with this guy? Well, I had a Jaguar for a brief period of time, and this was the period of all of his mafioso pictures. And I thought, well, I'll just have him sitting in the back of the Jag. And he did. He was cooperative.
Was this before or after Mean Streets?
This would have been 75, so I don't know when Mean Streets. After? Yeah. because I know he'd done a couple of sort of gangster-type films. This is a German film director named Werner Schroeder, who died in the last few years. What he's doing is he's holding my globe strobe flash. And the flash cord is actually what you see from his waist, that bright line from his waist that goes down and slightly to the right. I had him take his jacket off and sort of, so he's holding his own light source. And as a film director, he totally got into it. He knew what he was doing, and he just did all these, you know, very dramatic poses for the camera. Rip Torn. And then one of my favorite movie directors of all, Russ Meyer, who's notable for Faster Pussycat Kill Kill, mostly, and Mudhoney. He was really into the big breasts, and I have this picture, and I look at his hand, and I think, what's he doing there? You know, what's going on with that hand, you know? And anyway, he was, I wanted to take a picture of him in this, sitting on the up top bench in the steam room in the Y, but he said, oh, I don't have time for that, I don't have time. Well, of course, we talked for an hour and a half, and it would have been fine, but this one works too. This is one Sunday or Saturday weekend in Golden Gate Park. This is Lawrence Ferlinghetti with his son Lorenzo. And that's the end of my portraits. Now we come to Rag Theater. This is the picture that launched me on doing the book. I took this picture in 1969, and I really, really liked it. And I thought, I just sort of went from there, oh, well, I like this picture, I'll do a book. And I shot for 4 years. Not every day or anything, not even every week, but a lot. The title of the book comes from this clothing store. They sold mod clothing. I never noticed that I'd spelled the book T-E-R, and the store was R-E, until an editor that I was working with on something about 10 years ago said, why did you spell it differently? And I said, what do you mean? Anyway, there's a real undercurrent throughout this whole book, a motif of theater. I wasn't able to take these pictures to start with. I was pretty much, when I started, I was pretty much only able to take the simple straight-on shots, and I started accumulating them. And I realized I can't just keep doing this. I got to be able to do something else. And so I forced myself to be able to see other kinds of pictures. This scene was really complex. For a long time, I had a thoroughly negative attitude toward it because there are so many of these kids died of drugs and the life and the freedom that they were given at way too young an age to have any freedom. But when I put up the website, I got contacted by a bunch of people that were there that said, thank you for doing that. This was the greatest time of my life. This is the shining, golden, wonderful memory. And so I realized that my view was skewed, that I just thought, God, what a death trip, which it was for many, but there's more to it than that. And I don't know how to explain this. Many people, this was the time of their life. This kid with the lute impressed me. I recall being impressed with him at the time because he didn't just hang out. I would see him around the corner all by himself practicing. He had this self-discipline to do that. The guy with the hat in the upper left is playing a soprano sax, who's also on the right-hand side here, is Lenny Pickett, who has for many years been the music director of Saturday Night Live. This is when he was a street musician. If you shoot enough, you get lucky, you know? Like, without that dog craning its neck, this wouldn't be a good picture. I mean, it wouldn't, that's what makes the picture. If you're reading Roland Barthes, that's the punctum. That's the punctum. This was everybody's favorite dog, a little street dog named Brown Dog. And speaking of dogs, I counted up how many dogs there are in the ragtheater.com website. And I came up with about 50. Dogs are parts of dogs. And probably 3 leashes, you know? Leashes were the exception. This is part of a 2-page spread in the book where I'm missing one shot. I've got this one, and I've got this one, and I've got this one, and I didn't have the other one. So I put in a picture of somebody tying their boots, but not the same. Anyway, I don't know what to think about the Avenue now, except that it's just, you can't draw any conclusion other than it's just very complicated. A lot of dead kids, and a lot of kids who are just thrilled to have been there. These guys were so nice. I was a little intimidated because they looked like sort of mean bikers, you know, these guys that were just, and they were so into being photographed. Nothing to worry about. Cafe Mediterranean was quite a place. This is going into the Med. This is a shot that was kind of a breakthrough for me because it isn't a picture of anything, especially. It's just a group of elements that add up to something that is in some way compelling. This is paired with another picture. This is the long hair with the VW. This is the tourist, all sealed up in his car. And you can't see here, but the kid in the back seat has got a big smile on his face. But they have, you know, who knows what would happen if the windows were open. There's three groups of pictures on, I broke up the sequence into three groups of pictures on ragtheater.com. The first group is called The Scene. The second group is Faces. And the third group is where things got pretty dark, and I didn't want to put a word in like decline or, so I just, the name of it is the square brackets with an ellipsis, ... Anyway, these kids, I really hope that people are here, that were there, will add to the business about what was going on the Avenue. There was a lot of drugs. There was a lot of sexual exploitation of young minors of both sexes. This is the emblematic shot for the ending sequence, ... where things aren't so rosy. My work, I was never fanatic about keeping my negatives in order, but in general, they are chronological. And I really noticed a huge difference. The picture on the right was early picture, right in the beginning when there was this vibrant, fun energy. This guy, larger than life, Super Joel Tornabene. Totally, this guy died of AIDS in the early 90s, and he is totally still alive. I mean, there's a picture on my website, on Facebook page, rather, of Joel sitting in a chair. And under that, there's all of these comments, including from his sister. Just, this guy lives on in the memory of a lot of people, everybody that knew him. I mean, Super Joel he's still alive. That's me on the right. Don't mess with that guy. Yeah, you gotta watch out. I paired the pictures, I paired the verticals on the website because having them singly underneath a horizontal, if you have a single vertical, it looks dinky. And I just discovered somebody online, I saw somebody doing pairs that kind of balanced out the weight. The guy on the left is in the audience. And the little girl is in the audience. That's the little girl's mom. Anyway, the kids hung out here a lot. Paul Kagan and Kevin something. Kevin, I don't know what. This is Tom Farber, the guy that wrote the foreword, and I urge you to read it. It's rhapsodic. This was a character named Curtis. Yeah. You can't read the poster, but if you read it, this is against drug dealers. And it says that if you deal drugs, your sentence will be expulsion from Berkeley. Anyway, complex scene. Don't know what to think. For a lot of kids, a lot of great stuff, and for a lot of kids, it was toxic. Here's a sequence. Notice the guy sitting to the second from on the right in the middle. Oh, there he is again. What do you think about that? Well, here he is again, and here he is again. I don't know why we tolerate it. I mean, it was so laissez-faire. He got away. Well, we let him get away. I mean, that's me. That's called shotgunning. You put the joint in with the lit part inside, and then you blow out, and somebody else inhales it. I wonder what that. And I wonder what the pill is in the girl's hand. These guys. This is if any group of people was up to no good. These guys are, well, I don't know what they're up to, but they're up to no good, you know? Here's a shot where I'm embarrassed to say I had photographer-itis or something. I saw this guy laying there in that relationship to the arrow, and I didn't have one moment of concern about this guy. The only thing I thought was, great, the arrow's pointing right at him. I'm going to get this shot. And I think that, and I did, but you know, in retrospect, it's just, there's a certain callousness. Both of these guys asked me to take their picture. Sometimes, you know, when a photographer asks me, well, how do you get these intimate pictures? And my answer is, it's not particularly helpful for them, and that is that you get there first. It's your neighborhood before it's their neighborhood. And when they come, you're already there, and you're already shooting. So, you know, it's another way of saying, photograph what you know. But when I did this picture, I had been hanging out in the Med since 1965. Then here's a series of an event: stoned police car, cops, shotgun, let's make some arrests. You know, it's easier to tell in the next picture than this. All of the businesses had plywood all ready to roll on their windows to protect their windows from being broken. These didn't get quite put up in the right sequence, but it worked. And this is what was called the Telegraph Hilton, which was torn down to build the current Moe's some years ago. And this is a picture of me with 3 of the girls. And one memory that I have is when I saw the picture on the right that I hadn't looked at for decades. This memory came flooding back like the memory of when you eat the Madeleine soaked in tea. I remember I had never sort of had any physical contact with any of these kids. And the girl on the right, she put her arm around my shoulder, and so I put my arm around her. And I had this tactile body sense, recollection of how delicate and how bird-like and how small she was. You know, just this, she was probably 13 years old, maybe 14, but she was so, I mean, she wasn't sick or anything or unhealthy, but just how fine her bones were. And there's just this memory of, oh, it struck me, and it came back to me when I scanned this this negative. I think that's it. That's all there is. If anybody wants to ask a question, I can try to.
We have some questions.
How I got into photography. In 1961 and 62, I went for 1 year to an art school called Chenard Art Institute, which no longer exists. It was down in LA. And of the classes that I took, I think the one that I really got was the class in composition. We used to cut out little pieces of colored paper and arrange them on bigger pieces of colored paper. And anyway, in retrospect, I think that's the one I got. I came to live in Berkeley permanently, as it turns out, so far, in 1965, and I was a painter. I wanted to be a painter, and I had made these paintings that were really big, all the worse because they were terrible. And I can remember taking the paintings out of my apartment on Oxford Street, and we're talking 6, 7 feet high, leaning them up against the garage door to take photographs of them. And I got a little Kodak Instamatic that was sort of the size of a harmonica. And I took some pictures, minuscule little negatives, and they were no good. They weren't good enough. So then I went and bought a bigger Instamatic that was kind of a little boxy thing, and I took pictures with that, and those pictures were no good. And one of the things I learned is that if you're shooting something that's leaning back, the verticals are going to converge at the top of the frame, and that's not what you want when you're trying to make a picture of a painting. So then what I did is I went over to San Francisco to Brooks Camera, and I bought a Mamiya Secor, which is a real live 35 millimeter camera. It was kind of a clone of a Pentax, which was a popular camera at the time, a little cheaper. As soon as I got this in my hands, no more painting. That was all over with painting. I was shooting from 65, 66, 67. In 1968, right at the beginning of the year, the journalist students probably don't know this, but they ought to.
Okay.
There was a newspaper strike in San Francisco that went on for 53 days, and it involved all of the papers. There were no papers in San Francisco, except for some little Xerox thing that the Chronicle tried to put out. Essentially, there were no newspapers. Channel 9, KQED, for whom I had worked several years earlier as the night switchboard operator, with a switchboard like in the movies, they hired me as a photographer for Newsroom, which was the show they put on, which was a great show. There was a big round table, and the reporters were sitting all around, and there was a moderator, and these reporters were these guys that had been in the trenches in print journalism for decades. These guys were these old pros, and the moderator would ask, one of the guys to report on, whatever the story was he did, and the other reporters would ask him questions. It was a terrific show. The newspaper strike lasted 53 days. 1968 was quite a year for strikes, all over the world, if you research it. Anyway, I was the still photographer, and I would photograph these events, and they would send me out to shoot this or that or the other. One of the things I learned about journalism, and this is something that I'm sure all the journalism students know, there was a demonstration, there was an occupation of a building on campus called Moses Hall. And I got in there, it was nighttime, and I got into Moses Hall, and I was photographing in there. And actually, no, I'm sorry, it was the daytime. I got in there, and I didn't want to leave because I wanted to photograph the whole event. And it came time for me to leave to go back to get the photographs to Newsroom so they could go on the air. And somebody was leaving, and I said, call Channel 9 and tell them I'm trapped in here and I can't get out. Well, that was a really bad idea because somebody at Channel 9 called one of the deans, and they said one of our photographers is being held captive, and I can't remember how, somehow word got back to me. And so I did leave. I left and I went over there, and I can't remember whether the pictures got there in time or not. And then after that, same night, I went back into Moses Hall and was there for the rest of the night and for when they left in the morning. And then I was taken aside the next week by a reporter for the Chronicle named Trevor Thomas, who said, forget the whole story. It's the deadline. You get here in time for the deadline. It doesn't matter what you have to walk away from. You get here for the deadline. And I thought that was really you know, I never forgot that.
Nacio, one of my favorite pictures came with the book when I bought it. It's of Charlotte, the little dog with finger legs.
Yes. Yes, I do. It's this person also. I have, in addition to the ragtheater.com website, which has the whole ball of wax, I put up a Facebook page called Rag Theater, and on there, I mentioned in past, I think I posted that picture that you mean, and her street name was Frankie, and I mentioned that she, of all of the people on the avenue, she would be the last person that you would imagine would survive.
She's living in Fairfax.
She did. She survived. She got clean, you know, and she made it. And you never would have imagined that she would make it. But she did. And when I posted that she made it, there was a spontaneous comment by somebody who's a Facebook friend that said, "Frankie made it. Wow, that's great," or something like that. There was just this affection for her, but just this sort of spontaneous, you know, wow, that's just great, you know, because so many didn't. So many didn't. So.
You're a great photographer, Nacio.
Thank you.
I'd like to slightly address knowing you, Nacio, from the day. I was a photographer also, and there were a group of about maybe 10 or 12 of us that I had in my head of the shooters, and men and women, mostly men, but there were some women. And I have always felt, Nacio, that you were a cut above. You were a poet with that camera. I've held you in the highest esteem, what is it, 4 decades now?
Yeah.
So I want to applaud you and hope you guys get who this gentleman is.
Well, coming from you, Robert Altman, who's a wonderful photographer, concentrating mainly on rock and roll, I guess.
I'd say 50-50 lifestyle.
That's quite a compliment. By the way, before I forget, I want to thank Ken for inviting me here. And I also want to thank Brad Boca, who did this extraordinary job of scanning my negatives and making the prints that are out in the hallway. You cannot do better than Brad Boca. His company is Candela Fine Arts Printing. And also Sheila Newberry and Bobby Geritana and Brad for helping actually physically hang the show. Anyway, thank you. Thank you.